join me in giving a warm welcome to HillVets lead protégé, Jeenho Hahm.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining for this panel titled Answering the Call, Serving Again Through Politics. And as you can tell, we'll be talking about how veterans could serve again, but in a very different way from the military. And we veterans may know that politics is something that really had to avoid while on duty, like walking on the grass. But this time, we'll probably discuss how politics is just another form of public service, as we heard earlier today as well. And it is my honor to be moderating a panel of four most incredible experts on this topic. So if you could please come up one by one, please, and I'll introduce them. First, we have the Honorable Patrick Murphy, who was America's first Iraq War veteran elected to Congress in 2006, and then later he became the 32nd Undersecretary and later Acting Secretary of the Army by President Barack Obama. Now he is now a veteranpreneur who spearheads a wide range of business interests and offers veterans the opportunities to launch their own dreams by investing in their companies. Next, we have Madeline Meininger, who serves as the program manager for the MA in Public Leadership program at the University of San Francisco. It's a graduate program dedicated to preparing veterans and military family members for a career in politics, policy, or advocacy. And next, we have Alberto Ramos joining us virtually on screen here. He's the Director of Talent Development at New Politics, which recruits veterans and national service alumni to become elected candidates, staffers, or engaged citizens. And prior to New Politics, he also completed a nonpartisan White House Fellowship at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. And last but not least, we have MaCherie Dunbar, who is the Executive Director of Taking the Hill PAC. She's an Air Force veteran who served 2 tours during the Iraq War, and she has entered the politics with one focus: to create an easier path to services and resources for those who came after her. Alrighty, so we'll get to the first question, and it's going to be an easy one. Please tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are now in your current role in organization, please.
My journey started quite a while ago, I suppose, but my entrance into politics, as was said, was because I wanted to make a path simpler for those who came after me. My transition from the military was pretty difficult. I was medically retired, so I separated before my time, and it took me some time to find my purpose. As I was on that journey, I encountered some very deep struggles, and I kind of felt like if I'm the kind of person I am, I had a bachelor's degree, I was very resourceful, I was connected. If I could go through the type of struggles that I went through, then imagine those who didn't have the same wherewithal or the same capacity that I did. So I joined, I started doing campaign managing and field organizing, and I did a stint with Congress. Now I work with Patrick with Taking the Hill and Kennedy Democrats, one of his other PACs. And I also work with the Veterans of Foreign Wars by day, leading our transition program out of Fort Myer and the Pentagon. So putting in a lot of work to ensure our veterans are successful beyond service.
So I used to work in real politics and did political advertising data, which was fascinating and fun and did not make me feel good about democracy. As if you've watched a lot of political ads, you probably don't feel good about democracy either. So I wanted to be in civic engagement and civic education, and I had the opportunity to join the team at USF, we're actually based here in DC, to train veterans and military family members to run for office. And this master's program is a spinoff of the Veterans Campaign curriculum, a nonprofit that has done these trainings since 2009. And it's all, students across the country, across the aisle, with this whole range of experience within their military careers, but united by this sense of service, serving country and serving their communities. And I am so glad that I get to be a part of that service and not, the bloodthirsty political ads that I used to do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm disappointed I can't be in there in person. I actually live in DC, but am in Boston right now calling from a conference room. My path to politics was the opposite of Maddie's. I had spent time as a submarine officer, left the military, and thought that I was going to stay in foreign policy. I worked for a small government agency and love foreign policy, but it was this moment in time where we saw America's place in the world being questioned for a lot of reasons that had to do with what was happening here at home. And so I wanted to get involved and think about how we fix things here at home. I had gone through one of New Politics' programs called Answering the Call back in 2016, one of their first programs that they offered. And so the honest truth is I looked at the website and saw that they had a job opening, and they took a risk on me.
Hey, I'm Patrick Murphy. I'm a big fan of New Politics, and I actually work with both Maddie and MaCherie. So I am an adjunct at USF, the University of San Francisco, because as she mentioned, we have that master's in public policy, so it's really geared toward veterans. Civilians are also invited, but to get their master's degree, and it's bipartisan, and we have great instructors and guest speakers. So I know I teach to one course, and I've been there for several years. Seth Lynn is a Marine veteran, Naval Academy graduate, who him and Maddie run the program, so I'm a big fan. And then, I feel a responsibility. I got involved in political public service. I do believe it's absolutely a noble calling. I don't come from a political family. My dad was a cop and a Navy veteran, enlisted. My mother was a Catholic nun. Luckily for me, she dumped Jesus Christ to meet Jack Murphy. That was kind of a joke. Sorry, we're all devout Catholics, but when you're Catholic and a nun, you can't be married. So, but she left. So, but when I was the first Iraq vet elected to Congress, I really thought more veterans, their voices on both sides of the aisle are critically important. So I was thrilled that Brian Mast, Representative Mast, was here earlier, and I love the fact that HillVets is bipartisan and really, or tries to be nonpartisan, frankly. And so it's special. But because I had a chance to represent suburban Philadelphia and part of Philadelphia and co-author bills like the post-9/11 GI Bill and Hiring Heroes legislation and raising the minimum wage, and we got a veteran cemetery in my own district and Affordable Health Care Act, and then the author, as I mentioned, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. All that stuff, is important, but politics is personal, and it's people who love the country that are going to put the country first. That is desperately needed during this time, especially when there's this incredible lack of trust in government. So when you have veterans who bring to the table, whether Democrat or Republican, an innate trust because they've already been selfless public servants. That's what MaCherie and I get a chance to do. We help candidates. We were at a state representative candidate, a Navy veteran named Brian Monroe last night in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He's running for state rep. We were with Ashley Has, who's a West Point Rhodes Scholar, helicopter fighter pilot. He's running for the U.S. Congress and PA1 at an event last night. So, but we get to help through the Taking the Hill PAC and Kennedy Democrats, just the next generation of leaders who are going to be fighting for the common good and put the country first. So that's my journey, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you. Actually, you already answered some of it, but the next question was going to be, what makes veterans good candidates for public office?
I think one thing I want to disambiguate here is what makes veterans a good candidate for public office and what makes veterans good elected officials and public leaders, because those two are kind of separate things. I'll speak a little bit about what makes them good elected officials, because I know Alberto has a lot of other insights on this too, as well as MaCherie. I think there is this shared experience and willingness to work across the aisle that makes veterans able to be more effective once they are elected and once they have peers who they can connect with, who their fellow Democrats or Republicans may not be able to get across the aisle, but veterans know that the enemy is not on the battlefield, not across the aisle. There's also this prudent oversight and knowledgeable lawmaking when it comes to, and decision making when it comes to matters of national security and veterans affairs that veterans can bring their experience to. It is something that they've lived and can put that into effect once they're in elected office.
Maddie put it really well. I think my job is in recruiting veterans to run for office. And I think the first thing that pops into my mind is that not every veteran is the right answer, embodies sort of those values of servant leadership that we're hoping to see in a revitalized democracy. but many do. And I think at higher percentages than what you might see in the rest of society and whatever else. We are a bipartisan organization, but what we care deeply about is servant leadership. And so we evaluate for servant leadership, we think about servant leadership all the time in the types of people we want to work with and support as candidates. I think that veterans oftentimes self-select out, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the barriers to entry that veterans face in running for office. But my pitch to them is always, you can learn how to run a campaign. It's not rocket science. It's not that hard. The things that you bring to the table as a real servant leader are courage, empathy, and integrity in ways that, we don't see in our current political system. And this is a moment in time where we especially need veterans to step up to fix what's wrong in our democracy today.
MaCherie, you worked for Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan, and on the governing side, what did you see in her that drew you to her team and other veterans, her and other veterans that you see in the governing side of why it's important?
Well, Representative Houlihan had a really interesting background of being an engineer and an entrepreneur and all of these things that added to her palette as she was an officer in the military as well. But I think in general, what we see with veterans is the opportunity to see problems and approach issues with a cradle to grave perspective. We learn how to look at the entire component of whatever we're dealing with and figure out every single nuance that's related to it and how to best address those issues. So I saw a lot of that working with Representative Houlihan. There was never a very narrow focus. I mean, from time to time there was, yes, but it was always, what's the bigger picture? What are we trying to do long term? What's the best way to approach? And so that filtered from top down and the bottom up every way that we saw that. So, and that was the same with all the other veterans I've worked with. And in general, the leadership capacity. It's not just that cradle to grave focus, but whether you're an officer or enlisted, you're going to be a leader. You're going to lead projects. You're going to be a supervisor on teams. You really have that added value of, it doesn't matter what rank you are. So you can be 22 years old and have been a leader in Iraq or Afghanistan or in any of our other conflicts or even stateside. So being able to bring that approach to politics is critically important.
A general question. I do think veterans are more likely to put the country first. And I know for me, I was very proud that my best friend in the Army, someone I went to OBC with, and was my best friend in Congress. And we're different political parties. So, and I just think that's very important. We did bills together. I would say the media doesn't necessarily cover it that great. And again, I used to work for NBC when I left Congress. And that, when President Obama was in, he's of the opposite party. His name's Congressman Tom Rooney. We had a joint thing together where we're talking about, we basically tripled the amount of troops in Afghanistan to smoke out bin Laden and bring them to justice. We were in favor of that. And we did something together. The press didn't cover that because it wasn't us yelling at each other. And it wasn't us pointing fingers and calling each other not nice names. And I do think the media industrial complex is part of the problem with the division in America right now. And it's easy to tear things down as compared to build them up. And I do think that's one of the great things about HillVets, in that you are here as Democrats, Republicans, folks who are on the Hill, folks who are passionate about political public service, about moving the ball forward on behalf of all of us.
And as Alberto kind of hinted, the next question is going to be now, what are the concerns, challenges, and barriers that veterans especially face when they're trying to enter politics?
Can I just take this one just real quick?
Please do.
Here, not to dominate. So, first off, I would say there's 600,000 elected positions in America. 600,000. A lot of veterans are like, hey, they read the newspaper, et cetera, and like, hey, I want to run for Congress. Well, in the House and Senate, that means there's only 535 seats, out there. It's the major leagues. It's the top 0.5% of all elected positions, whatever it comes out to, right? But, and veterans, campaigns are split into three things. It's finance, communications, and field. So field, how many votes you need. In a House district like I ran in, you represent 700,000 people. Half those are registered. You need the half that are registered to win by 50.1%, right? So, and then on the communication side, it's the paid media and earned media. And a lot of folks in the military, I didn't have like a robust social media program. And I remember, I had young guys and gals that told me, hey, sir, you got to be on Twitter. You got to be on Twitter. I'm like, listen, I taught constitutional law at West Point before my 2 combat deployments. I'm more thoughtful than 146 characters. And I was so wrong. And eventually they broke me down and I did it. But, and then the finance part, because in the military, apolitical organization. You weren't there making business contacts and do business development, so it's harder to expand your base. But so most veterans, I advise them not to run for the U.S. Congress right away. Run for a state rep or run for a city council, and then build that team and build that up, because it's harder just to kind of go right into it. Unless you have $10 million or something like that. But it's hard to do that. But with your all perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things that can be tricky for veterans specifically is how you handle your military background in your narrative. Veterans have the advantage of the military being a trusted institution. It is the most trusted, according to Gallup, our host, is the most trusted institution.
Gallup.
Institution. Yeah. And so, there are advantages to having that military background and veteran story, but you also need more depth. You have to have something else to say other than I was a veteran. And leaning too far into it can also raise PR problems, like using uniforms incorrectly or using a drill to get some photos that then are shared inappropriately. And so there are some nuances to leveraging the veteran experience in a campaign that can be a little tricky to understand and navigate.
Yeah, I'd say you hit the nail directly on the head with that one, especially. And we see this no matter what job you're applying for. Veterans have a hard time translating that military experience into civilian speak in a way that can be relatable. So learning that and the ask, you have to be comfortable with the ask. And I think in general, that's something that people have to learn when they're entering politics. So that's certainly not veteran exclusive, but when you've been in the military world and that's been your world, you might have a little bit of a more difficult time overcoming that.
Repeating basically everything everybody else said, in my mind, I always think about it as sort of three different buckets for barriers to entry. They're informational, you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. They're financial, as Patrick was mentioning before. It costs a lot of money to run for Congress. Some of these state and local opportunities, cost far less. Some of them cost a lot, depending on where you live. And I think that there's hesitation around those two, around the informational and financial barriers to entry. But those are things that can be taught. Going through the Veterans Campaign programming or New Politics' programming or, whoever's, we can teach you that stuff. The challenge I face when I'm trying to recruit people, veterans especially, to run for office, are sort of these inner barriers to entry. And I think for the veteran population, there's a lot of questions around geography. I grew up in XYZ place, and I don't live there anymore because I served in the military and I had to go abroad for some period of time. And now I call some new place my home, or I'm thinking about moving back to where my original home was. Whatever that might look like, there are these questions around geography. There's a lot of questions around family. What is the pressure that I'm going to be placing on my family after having served in the military and already having placed a lot of pressure on my family before? Again, I don't want to minimize the first two barriers around information and finances because they are incredibly important. Those are things that could be taught. We love to be there and we love to connect our candidates and our prospective candidates with other people who can work through some of those inner barriers to entry and be a champion for you as you're, making what could be a really scary transition into politics.
Jeenho, because I think you made a really good point, and that's the one thing I would say to folks that are out there, whether you're in person or watching online, is that demographics are destiny. So, you could be Jesus Christ in some districts. If you're Democrat in a Republican district, you're not going to win, or vice versa. Demographics, you got to pick, is the fight going to be in a primary or is it going to be in a general? I was blessed in that I ran in a moderate district, and that there was Bucks County and Northeast Philadelphia and a small slice of Montgomery County. They only had two other Democrats ever win that in 200 and some years. I ran at a time when it was against a freshman member of Congress. It was in 2006, so it was a good year for Democrats. And so, demographics, for me, there was a path. It was unlikely, and I was outspent by over $3 million, but, I raised enough money to compete, and it was a relatively good year. In fact, we won 21 seats. In 2008, President Obama, or then Senator Obama, was on top of our ticket. I was 7 points ahead of him. I won by 15 points in that district. And then in 2010, that was a Tea Party wave where we lost 63 seats, meaning we being Democrats, and I was one of the 63 that lost. So again, the demographics were, hey, my district is an older district, it's a wealthy district, it's a very white district, so not great demographics for Democrats. So, and I lost by, a few points. The average loss that cycle was 26 points. It was a tsunami, not just a wave. So I would just say, if you are, planning on being part of a team or running yourself, look at the demographics and is it a winnable seat? And I don't think enough folks kind of look into that ahead of time. They just say, oh, someone invite me to join a campaign, or hey, someone asked me to run for office. And as Alberto said, it takes a lot out of you and your family, when you put your name on that ballot and you get after it.
So I'm pretty sure there's somebody here who's thinking about running for office one day. So if somebody just came up here, maybe it will happen during Q&A session, but if somebody came up to you and say, hey, what are some tips that you can provide me? What are the lessons you learned? What are the things that you wish you had known before you had started getting into politics?
MaCherie, you talk to our candidates all the time that they want to get our endorsement. They want to,
Yeah.
Well,
with KD, we have state and local, and with taking the Hill, it's federal. But I think if someone in general were to come up and say, hey, I'm thinking about running for office, what should I do? My first question would be, well, what problems are you wanting to solve and at what level? Because there's a difference, right? Like you mentioned, there's so many seats. So is it a county level? Is it state level? Is it federal level? Get to the root of the problem and make your decision there first. And then let's start looking at some of those additional things that were mentioned before.
I'd also when I tell people, and I advised hundreds and I recruited dozens in Congress, and I used to be the chair of Red to Blue in the D-Trip, and the person who ran the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee was my campaign manager, my chief of staff, to help take back the Senate from Democrats. Right now, the executive director of the D-Trip is my former unpaid intern, became my campaign manager. He's doing a great job. But I do tell people, hey, if you're moving back into a district to run for office, you're wrong. Like, you have to have a connection. You can't walk in there as a veteran and think you're a savior because you're a veteran. And you got to have a connection, and you should work a cycle or two for other people before you say, hey, could you support me? Because now I'm back home to be the savior. I think it rubs people the wrong way. I went back after my second combat deployment. In 2004, I worked for then Senator Kerry's presidential campaign for free as an unpaid intern for 3 months. And again, I was a senior captain, already taught at West Point, all that stuff. But I worked for free because I never worked in a campaign before. And then I helped the local DA race in 2005. This is 2004. 2005, I worked helped the local candidates for DA, et cetera. And then I was running in 2006. So, I had a couple, campaigns under my belt. And I had a day job when I was running, but and I wasn't independently wealthy. In fact, when I declared for Congress, I had $322 in my bank account. I had great credit, but I didn't share that with anybody. But so I think that's just an important factor that people should consider.
Yeah, want to double tap on what MaCherie said there in the beginning. I think that depending on what your passions are, really affects if and where you should run. And so there are some people who get so energized by filling potholes and doing that really important work in the local community. I love that. And that's like one of the best indicators for me that you really care about your community. There are tons and tons of opportunities to do that type of work. If the only thing you care about is sort of foreign policy, national security stuff, again, not to minimize people who have that mentality, you're not going to do that if you're running for city council person of Akron, Ohio. And so really being thoughtful about exactly what it is you want to run for and why is critically important. Then there's just some tactical stuff that might sound minor, but just conveys a level of seriousness in a prospective candidate. So there's something called organizing your network, or quote unquote Rolodexing. And it's basically like going through all the people you know and all the different circles that you are a part of and writing down their names somewhere in an Excel sheet or a Word document or whatever else. It is annoying, tedious work, but it is work that only you can do. In those early stages of a campaign, you can't pay somebody else to go through your life and figure out who you know and who you've met. And then the second piece of that is starting to warm up that network and talk to them about the fact that you're thinking about maybe running for office. Make sure that they feel engaged, that you're getting advice from people who care about you and love you. Again, it's just super important work that only you can do. And then the last, and everyone here is at this HillVets event, you are doing this in some way, is just continuing to expand that network. Patrick's point is really well taken. I think conveying real interest in your community is super important, especially if you're just moving back after having left the military. Join some local clubs that are nonpartisan, that are just doing good work. Volunteer, do that type of work to really become enmeshed in your community. Do that because you care about your community, but also in doing so, you're setting yourself up for success as you eventually have to make some of those campaign calls and ask people for money. So those are kind of some of the tactical things that I would advise people to think about ahead of running for office.
I think now we're going to open up for questions from the audience. Anybody?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rudy. I got a question for you. Specifically, can a political official get anywhere with foreign policy issues when the average voter really just cares about domestic issues for the most part?
What do you mean get anywhere? Like affect change or use it as a campaign platform? Like
Sure, campaign platform, and then actually making a difference later on if they're elected.
I mean, can I just, yes. So, but it depends on the cycle, right? So I would say right now, foreign policy, the Ukraine situation, like not on the top of people's list. They care about choice, they care about pocketbook issues, price of gas, inflation. So I say right now, not a great time. When I was running in 06 and 08, the number one issue was actually Iraq, and again, I'm not trying to be divisive here, but was separate from 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan. So it wasn't a one issue. And then how to utilize that. I mean, I did a lot of national TV that I wouldn't have been able to get if I wasn't an Iraq War veteran with the 82nd Airborne Division talking about it. I did choose when I was in Congress not to be a one bucket person. So I was on the Armed Services Committee, then I was in the Intelligence Committee, and then I got on the Appropriations Committee. But because I want to expand and not just be a one-trick pony just talking about foreign policy all the time. So it helped bring 2,000 jobs back to Bucks County, all this stuff, the fourth largest solar field in America. But other members have a different, like Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan is awesome, right? She represents Chester County, Pennsylvania. That was very Republican prior to kind of her getting there. But she serves on armed services and foreign affairs. So she's solely based on national security and foreign policy. Now, it doesn't mean she cares about a district and she cares about jobs. And she was the COO of N1, used to be a sneaker company. But I would say it depends on the cycle. And you got to talk to people on what they want to talk to hear and the pains that they're solving. And to MaCherie's point earlier, you're there to solve their pains. You're there to solve their problems. They're not there to just check one box, Democrat, Republican. That's 40%. In most districts are going to vote for their party, and that's it. It's the especially moderate districts, and there's only about 30 to 40 moderate districts in that U.S. House. They're the ones that are more of a jump ball where you gotta understand, where you could get independents and others on your team to upset the apple cart or a primary fight. It depends on which one it is. And the only thing I would say there is, I said it earlier, demographics are destiny, but I know like MaCherie and I, we just endorsed Ben Sorensen in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Why would we care about Ben Sorensen? He's the vice mayor of Fort Lauderdale. It's an open seat. It's Ted Deutsch's seat. Ben Sorensen is a Navy commander. He is the vice mayor and has been a great community leader, business owner, et cetera. He's the type of profile that could win in that district. He's a Democrat, right? And he's going against someone in a Democratic primary, because it's a primary Democratic district, that worked twice and was appointed twice in the DeSantis administration. As an example, I'm just using this. I'm not here to hawk Ben Sorensen, but he's literally could win a Democratic primary once he's in as a veteran. That should be pretty much a safe seat. So, and I know he's talked to New Politics folks and other, both vets and other organizations that are on the Democratic side that, we're helping them with to help them get over the finish line in a primary next month in August.
And I'll add on to that as well, speaking of my time with Representative Houlihan. So we had pretty much every problem you could think of divided into, I believe, about 26 different issue areas. Of those 26, she had her top 3 to 5. Those were the things that she felt were the ones that that really struck a chord with her. So as you're talking to the people in your communities, as you're figuring out what issues are most important to you, you're not just going to have one. If you do just have one, I would say take a few moments and think about some things that are happening in your world and your communities, and maybe broaden that just a little bit, because you do want to be able to have conversations with potential voters that are issues that they care about as well. So that while that may be your primary focus or the thing that resonates most with you, there's also going to be other things that you're going to be focusing on as well. So I would just say broaden it just a little bit. to make yourself more marketable to those voters, and recognize that there are so many different issue areas that you're going to get to tackle and your teams are going to get to tackle. So it's never just about one issue.
And I think that expertise also can be the credibility you use to inform the issues that are most pressing to constituents. So if it is immigration or if it is manufacturing jobs, foreign policy is part of those things that are what voters do identify as being important to them. And so you can use that expertise to sell yourself in the places that the voters actually, are available to be sold.
In 2022, intersectionality sells.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to, again, just double tap on what somebody else said, but I think what Maddie said is really true. And I'll be a little bit of a cynical political operative for a second. The truth is voters don't actually care that much about your policy proposals at all. Candidates can get so wrapped up in making sure, and that stuff is important once you're in elected office for sure. What voters care about is whether or not you're telling a genuine story that they connect with, the demographic issues that Patrick mentioned before. And yes, they care about policies, but they care about the policies that actually touch and affect them. And so if you're able to talk about the impacts, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and talk about the impacts on what they are feeling here at home, then that is an effective way to kind of communicate that message. Otherwise, some of this stuff is just far away, and it's sometimes hard to communicate those issues to voters. It is a different question on the campaign trail than it is once you're in elected office. Your opportunity, even at the local level, to do meaningful work that is tackling, sort of these bigger, broader issues is really impactful. And so once you're in elected office, you have a lot more leeway to work on the things that you're really passionate about. On the campaign trail, it's about connecting with voters, telling your genuine story, and why you care about the community.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Sanchez. I'm with Bristol Myers Squibb. My question is, well, first starting off that these conversations are excellent. It resonates definitely with the crowd here because we are in the nation's capital, right? I'm always thinking about back at home, right? Because nobody really is from DC, right? We're all these transplants, and once we're here, this is excellent for us, and we're like, it gets us going. But what are the challenges, and how far along are we in reaching out to these places back home? I knew New Politics, first time I heard of the organization, but I'm sure you guys are doing a lot of work out there. But that's one organization, and you're trying to cover the entire country. I know there's a lot of obstacles, and this is more so for like the veteran that just got out, maybe doesn't even have a bachelor's yet, but has an inkling of doing something. How do they find out that these organizations exist, like HillVets, like New Politics, so that they can actually get the gears rolling and make inroads wherever they need to make those inroads, and eventually come here and learn more, and just like that outreach?
Short answer, Google. No, seriously. When I first considered getting into politics, I was looking for candidate training, things like what New Politics does. The first one that I came across was Vote Vets, which is a great nationwide PAC. But it took some phone calls, it took some emails to say, hey, I'm looking for this kind of training. Does your organization supply this? So if you're brand new and you don't know anyone or know about anything, Google was a great resource for me. Once I started getting tapped in, then it was like, hey, there's New Politics, there's Emily's List, there's a huge list out there. So I would just say use your internet search tools. And there are, a lot of nonprofits that will have those lists there as well. But that was the best way that I got in.
Yeah, I also think it's one of those things where when you start getting a little bit involved, it all starts opening up. Mm-hmm. And so even if that's, in local organizations, I speak for myself, but like our organizations are always reaching out to localized organizations and saying, hey, who are leaders who might value this opportunity, right? What can we bring to you? So that we can create more access, but there is that first step of just being involved in a local organization and in local politics, and those first steps that anybody can take can really set veterans up to then get access to the subsequent larger national organizations.
Yeah, I kind of want to break the question into two pieces. On the one hand, I want to highlight the fact that unlike a lot of politics, the organizations that are represented here and many of the veterans organizations involved in politics we're all friends. We're not territorial. I knew MaCherie and Maddie and was really excited that we were going to be on this panel together. Patrick and the founder of my organization, Emily Cherniak, have been longtime friends and colleagues. And so unlike the rest of politics, I think we practice what we preach, and we are friends with one another. And I am always telling people about the Veterans Campaign and the great training they do, because it complements the training that we offer through our nonprofit. And so that is critically important, and I think something that makes us stand out from the rest of sort of the political world. The second piece of your question about kind of what should you be doing as somebody who is in DC and is, not super connected back at home or is trying to rebuild those connections or whatever else, is that your point is really valid. We are national organizations. We won't know your hometown as well as you will. And so a lot of the coaching that I go through, I don't know all the organizations, again, to keep beating up on Akron, Ohio, I don't know all the organizations in Akron, but I can work with you in helping identify those organizations, different political leaders that you can reach out to. And you'd be surprised how many of them will take a cold call and set up a meeting with you and just talk about what their path to politics looks like. So there is a lot of work that each individual prospective candidate has to do on their own that we're too small and we're covering the whole country. We can't do the effective job that we would like there. And so it's in a lot of ways on each individual person. We're here to help you through that process alongside all of these partners that you see here and others who aren't on this panel.
Part of local, you're represented by someone wherever you came from, whatever your member of Congress is or your two senators. Reach out to them, especially if they align with your values. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. I don't know where you're from, but and then just say, hey, listen, I'm a veteran. Can I speak to you? In DC, they'll have a MLA, a military legislative liaison, and then back in their district, they'll have a veterans coordinator, right? So it depends if you live in the district staff or the DC staff, but offer the help. They have academy boards, they have veterans committees. You could just do it. You'd be free labor for them, but just volunteer to be helpful, to help get connected. But I said it earlier, and I want to highlight it. When I tell people, that are going to go home to move for office, I say, is that where you want to be for the next 10 years? Because even if you win, you're going to be expected to go back home. It's not like you're in DC. I was home every weekend. One of my favorite stories is when Senator Obama was the senator, he's running for president, I was one of the first ones to endorse him. I was the only Iraq War veteran in Congress. It was the number one issue at the time. And I traveled to Iowa and New Hampshire. I was 33 years old. I was hustled because I believed in him. He was down when I endorsed him 38 points at that time, Secretary Clinton. But I believed in him. Didn't necessarily know if he could win, but I supported him. I would say, one time when he won, Reggie Love, who was his body guy, called me up. He was a Duke basketball player and football player, and he said, hey, the president has a pickup game tomorrow. Would you want to play basketball with him? He called me on a Friday, and I said, Reggie, I'd love to, but I got to be back in Bucks County. And he goes, what do you have tomorrow? Can you go back after the game? I go, I have to give the Man of the Year award out at the Shirmi Synagogue. And he goes, Congressman, how many people are going to be there? I go, there's probably going to be 15 people. But Hal Lefcourt is the Man of the Year, and he expects his congressman to be there. And he committed his life for decades. He was 70-something years old. He was a veteran. I was like, I got to be there. And I love, President Obama, but Reggie, I made a commitment. I can't do both, and I'm sorry. And they were cool. He's like, I totally understand. That's why he loves you. And I played, several times with him, and I played in the future. But you got to make choices in life. You got to, and my choice was I was going to represent those 700,000 people, and the 2.5 million Iraq, Afghanistan veterans, because I felt like I was their voice, whether they're Democrat, Republican, whether they voted for me because they're from Pennsylvania or not. And that to me, actions speak louder than words. And so when you say, hey, how can I get connected back home? Now's the time to do it. Don't wait till you move back home, especially if you're interested in political public service.
If I could add on to that just really quickly, one of the common things that comes up when I'm meeting a new prospective candidate is tell me where to move. Tell me where's the most likely place for me to win, or do you have any intel on a seat that's opening or whatever else? And first off, it's a little bit of a red flag for us, but it's also just the wrong way to think about this, the problem that you're trying to solve, whatever you might care about. And, Patrick is talking really eloquently about winning and the things that you have to do once you're in elected office. There is a good chance that you end up losing too. And when you lose, that's your home. That's the place that you've decided that you want to live. Of course, you can move somewhere else or whatever else. But when we're kind of coaching people on the geography question, the conversation is always around like, where is best for you and your family? Like, take the election. Demographics matter. Your likelihood of success will change depending on where you move. But like, what is your community? What is your home? Where do you want to raise a family? However that conversation might sort of come up. Because if you end up losing your election, and obviously that's not the goal, you're there in that community. And we want to make sure that you're happy, that you're telling a genuine story of why you care about that community and the constituents who live there.
Major General Pat Sargent just walked in the door. So he runs Cerner, he's general manager for Cerner, and then on Performance Binders in the next panel. But we talked earlier about the issues like being an authentic leader. On a national security issue, people do care about Iraq, Afghanistan. They're kind of following Ukraine. It was really hot. They kind of followed the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I mean, we all in the community followed it closely, and it ripped our hearts out. And still, I think a lot of us are working on. I'm on a board of No One Left Behind, helping folks come over here. But you got to go very granular, when you talk about policy. Like, I have geeked out on rumble strips more than, I don't know if you know what rumble strips are, but rumble strips, when you're on the side of the road. Do you know why we have rumble strips? We have rumble strips because people like Mrs. Murphy in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, lost her son, who was a college student, on a ski trip in Colorado. Him and his buddy fell asleep. They went to the side of the road. There's no rumble strips. They died. They weren't drinking, but they were tired. They were skiing all day, and they died. And, I geeked out about how we have the most progressive rumble strip program in America, and I focused on rumble strips for a long time and getting money from rumble strips. When I was in the Armed Services Committee, I was in the Personnel Subcommittee. And John Stewart and all these folks, and again, I like John Stewart. His wife is from Bucks County. I met him. I was on his show. Great American. But he would talk about, why is it the veterans have, millennial folders of their healthcare records? Why can't we digitize this and this and this and this? And so in the House, in the Armed Services Committee, in our Personnel Subcommittee, we authorized the bill, and then I became an appropriator, authorizing the bill for electronic health records for the DOD and the VA. And then we have people like Secretary Panetta and General Shicheki at the time, who was the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense, and the VA Secretary, talk about interoperability, what we're doing. And again, Pat Sargent's going to talk about this next, General Sargent, but, that's not necessarily sexy, like electronic health records, but it's going to save lives. When you go and get prescription medicine, and it's the wrong medicine because one VA isn't talking to the other VA, or the VA is not talking to the private CVS, like, that stuff saves lives. It is not sexy. I will admit it. Sexy is yelling at each other. But making it better, like the DOD started, now it's the VA. DOD started, it's now over 50% of the DOD hospitals use electronic health records. It's positive, and it's commercial off the shelf, right? It's not creating a new thing. And now the VA's doing it. Is there hiccups? Absolutely. Should we call out the hiccups? Should it be better? Yeah. Do we hold people like, General Sargent and the Cerner and Oracle folks? Yeah. But also do God's work and make it be part of the better. Work with them, highlight it. It's easy to throw stones, whether you're Democrat or Republican. It's easy to be like, I hate you, I hate this, I hate this. How about point out some of the positive things? And I get it. Again, I work for NBC. If it bleeds, it leads. But what are you doing to put the country first? What are you doing to say, hey, I'm a Democrat, but I really appreciate this Republican? Or hey, I'm a Republican and I really appreciate this Democrat. Just because they're from a different political party doesn't mean they don't like America, or they're not American, or they're not trying to move the ball forward. So if you're not trying to always, I split my ticket every time I vote in elections, I split my ticket. Every time. I'm a committed Democrat, I'm a proud Democrat, but you know what, there's Republicans out there that I really like, and I find them and I will vote for them 99% of the time. I might not be public about who I vote for because it's quiet in the ballot box. But if you're not doing that, you're not putting the country first. You're being a partisan hack. And that's not, at this time, what the country needs. Sorry, Jeenho, but I just want to go off because, I get it. Electronic health record modernization is not a sexy topic, but in our veterans community, it is life and death for our brothers and sisters out there, period. And I'd like to see John Stewart talk about that more. He doesn't have a show anymore, but why don't you talk about the good things that are happening right there? I'm sorry, but
Period.
yeah.
Hello, I'm Trevor, and I'm actually active duty enlisted military. I work as an intern for AUSA. And a question I have for all you guys is I heard about the bipartisan aspect and also for youngish veterans like myself that are interested in politics. I'm curious, what are you guys' thoughts on a third party like type candidate, like kind of coming in just to stir the pot a little bit as far as politics? Because I think about kind of boring stuff as well, like the supply chain crisis right now. I think it'll affect, for example, military readiness and civilian readiness. And I don't hear a lot of people talk about it when we talk about, say, military topics. And if somebody were to run for office, I feel like, that's a single issue approach and it shows a genuine interest. Big question, but hopefully it came through. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, it is serving in the military. You obviously are completely nonpartisan. You're restricted by the Hatch Act and the lights are turning off. And a lot of veterans, when they're leaving the military, maintain that sort of nonpartisan nature. They're either confused by both parties, uninterested in both parties, whatever else. And I hear it, and I'm very sympathetic to sort of that view. There are many offices you could run for at the state and local level that are nonpartisan, truly nonpartisan. Some of them are nonpartisan in name only, and Democrats and Republicans do actually play a role, but there are plenty of nonpartisan races across the country where you could be effectively a third-party candidate. This is me speaking, from a place of cynicism, probably. I do not believe that our system was set up at the federal level to effectively have third-party candidates. The reality is that both parties, aligning yourself with one party or the other, does provide so many resources, so much support that it's really hard to make up unless you're just, crazily independently wealthy and can run as a third-party candidate. So there are some hard realities about attempting to run as a third-party candidate at the federal level that, I would not recommend it. That being said, we're here to work with servant leaders. And so I work every single day with people who are attempting runs as third-party candidates, trying to make it work. There are good veterans organizations. Veterans for Political Innovation is one that comes to mind, that's advocating for reforms that could make a third-party system more viable in the U.S. But again, my sort of cynical view of this, at least at the federal level, is that I would not recommend it. And it is just an immense challenge to try to run as a third-party candidate. We would love to talk about what are the issues you care about, plug you into some local Democratic or Republican groups and let you get your feet wet and think about, what might feel right. And again, at the end of the day, if your answer is, I don't belong to either of these parties, I want to run as a third-party candidate, we will be helpful. We will, support you in whatever ways we can. But we have to be truth tellers here, and it's just incredibly difficult to run as a third-party candidate.
Yeah, I think to throw some numbers on that, and it keeps moving around, but about a third of voters identify as independent. Most of them always vote for the same party. They are not members of a party, but they're not true undecided voters, toss-up voters who could be got either way. They definitely have a strong lean. So just, when we're talking about looking at a district, understanding the partisan makeup and the demographics and kind of what that win number is, keeping in mind that, you might see 40% independents, but looking at the historical trends are going to be a lot more indicative of how they're going to actually vote, and it's most likely going to be with the party that they always vote for.
Yeah, I'll answer this question from a bit more of a personal perspective, separate from every organization that I represent right now. I certainly agree with what's been said, that as a military person or as a veteran service member, you have that nonpartisan outlook based on what you've had to do during your time in service. When it comes to the federal level, I agree with Alberto 100%. I don't personally think that there's a place for that, especially with what's happening in this country right now and what's been happening for the last 4, 6, 8 years. There's too much division. There's too much on the line. And personally, as a Black gay woman, you got to choose a side. And that's me speaking very personally. It doesn't matter what you believe in or what side you're on, but with what is on the line as a country, we kind of need you to choose if you're going to be at the federal level.
And when I joined the Army, I was 19. I said I want to be an airborne ranger, like my uncle was in Vietnam, and my father served, my uncle served. And I was unaffiliated because at the time, the captain, who was in charge, he said, hey, you guys should not probably register either party, you should be unaffiliated. And that's what I did. It was like that until I literally ran for Congress and picked a side. I'm a big believer of open primaries. So open primaries, how that works, I think that is the way forward, because I agree with what everyone said already. It's not viable, right? Unless you're a billionaire and something like that, then that's different. But open primaries solve it, like in Massachusetts, where Alberto is right now, and he's not from there, but traveling up there, New Politics is based out of there. You can vote, if you're independent, you can vote in a Democrat or Republican primary. That gets a lot more moderates to vote. And so I think that can swing elections. You get more people who are willing to work across the aisle because I understand they can get some independent votes. I think that's critically important. We don't have it in Pennsylvania. I think we should. So you give people skin in the game so they can vote in primaries, because otherwise you're not really voting. Right? And the second thing I would say is make it personal to you. I mean, you said, hey, I'm an Army, I'm a NCO, enlisted. Do you know who the highest ranking enlisted person was ever serving Congress? My roommate, Command Sergeant Major Tim Walz. Command Sergeant Major Tim Walz is a great American. We were freshmen members of Congress together. He's from Minnesota. He's now a governor of Minnesota. He has a really tough re-election on his hand because it's just the climate, right? We worked hard, MaCherie and I, on Westmore. Westmore, 82nd Airborne, was nonprofit leader, CEO with Robin Hood, just won an upset victory. We supported him in a Democratic primary for governor in the state of Maryland. He will have not as tough, but he'll have a fight. It should be okay, but he should have a fight. But that's right down the street. So if you ever want to get in a campaign, volunteering for Westmore, spend a weekend up in Minnesota for Command Sergeant Major Tim Walz. And again, there happen to be people I'm supporting, but maybe you're on the other side of the aisle. I think that's important. Now, AUSA, which is the Association of the United States Army, it's 250,000 members, it's the voice of the Army. It's nonpartisan, so you don't get involved in, I get it. But I would say on your personal capacity, if you're passionate like we all are on political public service, and that's probably why you're here, get in the game, volunteer. And I volunteered for veterans, even before I became a candidate. And I think that's important.
I want to thank all of you, Patrick, Madeline, MaCherie, and Alberto. Thanks for joining us, and hope you enjoyed the panel as well. Thank you.